Kia ora tātou everyone, and welcome to this edition of InFocus, a TLA podcast. I'm your host Michael Andrew, and each episode we will be sitting down and talking to an inspiring guest connected to the legal sector, listening to their stories as they share their experience, and in the process explore some of the significant work that is being done behind the scenes that impact the industry and our communities. Kia ora tātou everyone, and welcome to InFocus, a podcast from the Law Association of New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining us. Returning to the guest seat today is the charismatic and estimable president of the Law Association, Tony Herring. Tony is a partner at Wellington firm Gibson Sheet, where he practices in the areas of commercial and property law with an emphasis on Crown property work, commercial leasing and employment law. He is also a former marathon runner, having completed 20 marathons from around the world. Mr. President, how are you?
Very well, Michael. Great to see you, and thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Thanks for coming all the way up from Wellington. I presume this is the sole reason you're up here, but then I heard that you had dinner with the Chief Justice last night, so that was probably that probably trumps us.
It worked in well that I could come and see you after dinner with the Chief Justice. I say I had dinner with the Chief Justice, but it was a room full of about 60 people.
Okay.
But it was another highlight of this role being president. I got to go to the Pacific Judicial Conference Gala dinner last night.
Awesome.
And it was a fun night. It was emceed by Justice Joe Williams, who had the whole room standing singing a waiata while
cool.
he played the guitar, and the Chief Justice was there, a whole lot of judges from around the Pacific. I was at a table with some Australian judges, Filipino judges. It was a good night.
Wow, that must have been quite interesting to rub shoulders with judiciary from around the world.
It's one of the benefits of being in this role is that I do get to liaise with those people in a social setting. And one of the pieces of work we're doing at the Law Association at the moment is talking about practitioner well-being, particularly in the litigation side. Now, I'm a commercial lawyer, right, so I don't appear in court, but a couple of our council members are in court all day, every day, and so they have some really strong views about practitioner well-being, and we are able to engage directly with the Chief District Court Judge, for example. So Judge Tomonu was there last night, and I had a couple of good conversations with him, admittedly in a social setting, but just developing that relationship with him, and that will then enable us to go and talk to him in his chambers within a couple of weeks to formalise the thoughts we've got around how we can improve practitioner well-being.
Are there any direct strategies that you are looking to employ?
We haven't got to that point yet. We have got a whole lot of ideas. It will come down to resourcing, which these things often do. The other person who I was interested to talk to last night at this function was the Secretary of Justice, so Andrew Kibblewhite. And so the fact that I can have direct lines of communication, I'm now representing, our membership has grown to 7,715 as at yesterday,
Wow.
which is really exciting. So that gives me, I think, more of a seat at the table. It gives me a bit more mana. It gives me a bit more leverage to be able to actually talk to these people and get my message across on behalf of those 7,715 members.
And I think this is your third year running as president, which also gives you some longevity that you can apply to these interactions and to your influence. Is
Absolutely.
that kind of working out? I mean, people know you now. You've been around, for 3 years, so that's really something to bring to the table, right?
Yeah, 100%. It seems to have gone quite quickly, really. It's hard to believe I'm just about to start my third year as president. It doesn't seem to be quite long enough, but on the other hand, it's a big role, and it can be tiring at times. It was a late night last night. But yeah, you're right. It does give me a bit more recognition, and when I go to these functions or events or conferences, people recognise me, so that's just a lot easier to start off the meaningful conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, yeah, as I mentioned, president for the third year, so that gives you quite a bit of time to reflect on your tenure. And we talked about this last time, what were your highlights? That was obviously last year. What's changed for you in the last few months in terms of, when you think about your time and I guess, what have been the standout moments for you and the achievements? Is there anything that comes to mind?
There's a few things. So as well as being president for just over 2 years now, I've been on the council for 6 years. So the way our council operates is that it's a totally member-voted system. So you could call that democracy, I guess, but all 7,715 of our members get to vote for council members, and there are at the moment 8 council members, a mix of a couple of non-lawyer council members, an appointed lawyer member, but the rest are all elected. And then from within that group, we will vote for a vice president, and then the president is a separate election. Again, all members get to vote for the president. This year, there were no other nominations, so I was re-elected unopposed, which I'm really thrilled about. It's great. Julianne Kincaid KC has been my vice president for the first 2 years. That will be up for votes in our first council meeting following the AGM. We work very well together, so I would be perfectly happy for her to continue in that role, but the council will make that decision. Yeah, so I've been doing this role for now 8 years, and one of the biggest achievements for the organisation that comes to the top of my mind is the growth in our membership. So when I first came onto the council 8 years ago, our total membership was about 3,800, and we were the Auckland District Law Society, and of that 3,800, I suspect probably 70% were based in Auckland. A couple of days ago, our membership hit 7,715.
That's crazy growth.
And we have a target of about 9,000. So that's aspirational, but if I can leave the presidency in a year's time with 9,000 members, I will have done my job, I suspect.
What do you attribute that growth to? Is it just purely what you've done as the current council, or is it just a range of things?
It's a range of things. It's clearly not just me. I can't take full credit for doubling the membership. I mean, one thing we've done is we've introduced firm membership. So we've been a bit creative in how we can just attract more people to membership. But things like Law News, for example. So Law News is a really good example. When I first came onto council, Law News was a weekly publication, a hard copy magazine that was posted out to all of the members around the country, and you would get it on a Friday and you'd read it over the weekend. And then a few years ago we changed that to a digital publication, and it was a PDF link that you got emailed, and there was quite a bit of pushback from some of our older members about that. They really missed the magazine, and so we still for a period of time would publish a handful of magazines and send it out to some of the members who still wanted them, but then we went away from that, and now we've gone away from the weekly publication to a totally online digital platform with news coming 24/7. And that's just, I think that when you look at the readership of that, and we can get all the data about how many people are clicking on to each article, it's a phenomenally successful publication, and we're getting fantastic feedback. So even last night at the Pacific Judicial Conference, I was getting people coming up to me saying how they love the Law News publication and how they can get their news on time every day. And it's just so people want to be members for reasons like Law News.
Well, I'll take credit for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Partial credit.
As you should. As you should, Michael.
Oh, no, that's great. That's fantastic to hear. And I guess the great thing about having the Law News website is that traceability and those metrics to be able to see who's coming to the site, who's clicking on the links, who's reading the stories, and that gives you an idea about the broader appeal.
Absolutely. We can get demographics, so we can split it down to age groups and which age groups are looking at which articles. And so one of the things that we'll focus on this year will be supporting younger practitioners, and we'll start at the law schools, and we will develop some programs and some CPD and some activities and some collegiality functions focused on those younger practitioners, so we can actually see from what they're clicking on in Law News what they're interested in and what they need, and that will target where we put our resources.
So what was it like trying to target those members from outside Auckland, transitioning from the Auckland District Law Society? And you mentioned last time we chat that was like you equated it to the ASB thing, right?
Yep.
You call it the Auckland Savings Bank. No one in Christchurch is going to bank with the Auckland Savings Bank, but you change it to ASB, and you changed it to ADLS, and then you changed it to TLA. But still, that's a big gap to bridge. to attract those members from outside the region to something that was always known as an Auckland organisation. How did you manage that, and when did you start to see the results?
We started to see the results pretty early on in my tenure on the council. We made a concerted effort to get around the country, and I did quite a lot of travel around the South Island. So we would have events and meetings in Invercargill, for example, Dunedin. I went down to Dunedin last year. There's a little bit of a segue, but there was an issue with some practitioners struggling with I can't go into too many details, but they were struggling with a couple of issues down in Dunedin. So I jumped on a plane and flew down and met with them. And then I could go and represent them to the bodies that were causing the issues, and those issues seem to be on the way to getting resolved. So we're making a concerted effort to actually front up and show our face and have meetings, have collegiality events and have CPD functions in places like Christchurch to prove that we're not an Auckland-based organisation. And I think just the mere fact that we've now got a president who's based in Wellington is quite powerful demonstration of the fact that we aren't an Auckland organisation. We are here for the whole country.
That's interesting that you mention the regions, because we did a story on Law News about small town law and the lawyers that choose to practice in provincial towns. And when I interviewed these people, one of the themes that always came up was, well, we used to have so many events, and we were always, flying out to Wellington or Auckland to have these events and really network. But that's kind of been on the decline in recent years. And these are lawyers that have been practicing for 35 years, 40 years, some of them. So I guess coming in with the Law Association and filling that gap and offering these collegiality events and this networking through legal education and CPD is a real solution to, I guess, this disparate landscape that a lot of lawyers find themselves in when they feel like they're isolated a little bit.
Absolutely. And I talk about this a lot, but practicing law now is so different to what it was like when I was a young practitioner, when we would be physically meeting each other at each other's offices for bank settlement, or we'd meet at the bank to do a property settlement, or we'd meet at the land transfer office to do a title search, or we'd meet at the company's office to do a company search, and you'd get to meet your fellow practitioners. Those opportunities are very few and far between now. So we are trying to fill that gap and trying to get people together. We could do more. We could go, I'd love to do a road show and do Timaru, Oamaru, Dunedin, and really get to those regions. It'll come down to a resourcing issue, I suspect, and have we got time to get everywhere we'd like to get? I'd love to go and have a collegiality function in Greymouth, Hokitika, Westport. And
that would be awesome.
Yep, watch the space.
You get me on the road permanently. That'd be great.
Yeah.
It's the dream, right?
Well, I wouldn't say it's the dream, but when we do, I remember going to Invercargill a few years ago, and we had a fantastic night, and there was such good feedback, and the local practitioners that turned up, and there was only about 20 of them, but they were just so thrilled that we were there, and they were being heard. So the more of that we can do, the better.
And I suppose a lot of these lawyers who are operating in their kind of silos, they're taking on a lot of work, they're under a lot of pressure. There's obviously a responsibility on them to always be updating their knowledge through kind of CPD and legal education. So there's a real need in small towns and regions for this type of contact and for this type of interaction that the Law Association can provide. There is.
And I mean, we do really good CPD, and we have the webinars and we live stream them out. So anyone, if there was a practitioner on the Chatham Islands, they could zoom in from there. But in my view, there's no substitute for face-to-face contact. Coming to a conference or coming to a CPD session in person, I think, is far more valuable. You get to engage with all your fellow practitioners, and it might be just over a drink at the end of the day, or it might be during a lunch break, but you get so much more out of it. And the other thing I wanted to say, Michael, is that whenever I go to these collegiality functions, whether it's the West Auckland Lawyers' Lunch or the Rotorua Lawyers' Lunch or the Christchurch After 5 event, one thing I always say to the members is that if there's anything that they think we can do to help them that we haven't already thought about or that we don't already do, please come and tell me. And I always offer to stay as long as the last person's there. So I've had to change flights every now and then to defer my travel back home. But if anyone's got anything on their mind, come and tell me about it, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple of really insightful ideas that we haven't thought about before. And it might be from a sole practitioner in a very small regional town. It might be an AML-related issue, which we get a fair bit. But if we don't know what is on people's minds, we can't offer a solution.
Why AML? Why is that?
AML seems to be a significant administrative burden on a lot of the smaller firms.
Yeah.
AML can be a costly exercise, and having to pass those costs on to clients doesn't make your client particularly happy. So a lot of people are coming to us seeking help with AML.
Yep.
And coming back to the membership issue, now that I've got 7,715 members in our organisation that I can represent, when I went and met with the Minister of Internal Affairs last year, I talked to her about AML. She's put me on to a different minister who's responsible for AML, but we're having those conversations and we've got some really good ideas around how we can streamline AML. So rather than having to, if you came to me looking to undertake a property transaction, I would have to do AML on you. You've already done it with your accountant and you have to do it with your bank. You'll also have to do it with your real estate agent. So by the time you get to me and I say, I just need to do AML on you, Michael, you're getting a little bit grumpy at the fact you've had to do it 4 times. So we're talking to government about how we can streamline that and perhaps have one central repository where AML is done. So you can do it through, I can get your AML through that repository, so can the accountant, so can the bank, and so can the agent, and you only need to do it once. So it's things like that we can make some real practical gains for our members.
For all the many thousands of non-lawyers listening, AML is anti-money laundering.
Yes.
And I actually heard that the legislation is quite flawed. Well, the original legislation is quite flawed, and it's going through a series of amendments at the moment, which would hopefully reduce that compliance burden.
Yes.
And I guess if you're a small practitioner and you're under-resourced, it's a huge cost and a time burden to be able to go through that process with every single client.
And the practice of law is stressful and pressured as it is, and adding another administrative burden is, for some people, almost the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it's those sorts of things that where we get feedback directly from members at these lunches. So it's not just a junket. I'm not just going to a lunch to have a couple of beers and some nice food and chat to people. It's actually getting intel and trying to find out what can we do to help our members and then actually putting that into practice.
And I suppose it's really interesting having that insight into community law and small town law, and it's like the kind of ground zero of law where it really functions and serves a purpose for a small facet of society. Just doing the story, it's like this is the bones of law, where you're actually serving a community, a small group of clients, but you're focusing on really essential pieces of law that needs to be done for that community to function.
That's right. And there's a whole piece there, the access to justice piece. Community law fills a massive part of that, but there's still a lot of issues with the access to justice and delays. What do they say? Justice delayed is justice denied. And I was talking about this with a couple of the judges last night about the backlog in courts. And community law is a big part of that, but we are a big part of that as well, because we can talk directly to people about what the practice on the ground is and how that can be improved, whether it's by technology or AI or digitising all of the processes in the courts, for example. We've got some skills around our council table that can actually be really informed and then inform the decision makers about what solutions could look like.
Do you ever get confusion between the Law Association of New Zealand and the New Zealand Law Society? Because I imagine a lot of prospective members who weren't familiar with the Law Association as a national body would be like, how does this differ from the Law Society, which is obviously been around a long time and has a lot of prominence? How does that work for the listeners who don't know the distinction.
We do. We still get confusion. I think it's less since we changed our name from the Auckland District Law Society to TLANZ, or the Law Association of New Zealand, but there is still some confusion. So I try and explain it in the fact that our organisation is the only independent representative body for lawyers in New Zealand. And by independent, I mean we are not a regulator. So the New Zealand Law Society's in my view, primary function is to be the regulator. So they will issue practicing certificates and essentially give you permission to practice law, and then they will regulate your practice of the law and deal with any complaints against you, deal with disciplinary matters. They will assess you when you want to have a practicing certificate to practice on your own account. All that regulatory side of it, which is clearly critical for a profession, but then we are purely representative. So we represent lawyers, we advocate for lawyers, we are constantly advocating at the levels of judiciary and parliament and the executive, and we are talking to ministers, we are presenting submissions at select committees, we are advocating and representing our members and the wider profession. So we have none of that regulatory burden. We can focus purely on good, healthy, positive representative functions.
And that's obviously what you're going to focus on in the next year. When's the next election? How long do you have left in your tenure?
Well, the way it currently works, so the organisation's been around since 1879, and traditionally it was, until 2008, it was part of the New Zealand Law Society, and when the 2006 legislation was passed, that's when the Auckland District Law Society became a separate organisation. But until then, it was a typically 1 year president term, and council members would work their way through, become vice president, then become president for a year, and then move on. Now it's a separate, independent, incorporated society with member rules, and the president, until the forthcoming AGM on the 6th of March 2025, the president has been permitted 3 1-year terms. So I had to stand for election 3 times, and I had a 1-year term. Now, 1 year goes by in the blink of an eye, especially when you're the new kid on the block and you're the new president. You're trying to get to grips with how everything works, getting to know all of the staff and the team and the council members. So we are putting forward a few changes to our constitution, largely driven by the new Incorporated Societies legislation, which means we have to update the rules. But we're taking the opportunity to change the tenure for president to 2 terms of 2 years each. Okay. We just think having a 1-year term and having to run an election every year is a little bit too fraught. And then we will have rolling 2-year terms for council members, which won't be, what's the right term for this? They won't all come up for re-election on the same year.
Yep.
They will alternate year to year, so there'll always be some continuity.
Okay. So if those changes come through, will that renew your term by another 2 years?
No, I'll be done at the end of this year.
Really? I'll be done. Change the rules so that you stay in?
No, I'm not Donald Trump. I'm not going to try and outstay my welcome. I think good governance would suggest that 9 years, which is how long I will have been on council, is enough, and it'll be time for a fresh voice, fresh faces. There's nothing to stop me coming back after a year away. I can't see that happening. The organisation's in really good heart. We've had really good councils, but it's broader than that as well. I mean, the committees, we've got 18 standing committees at the Law Association, ranging from the Criminal Law Committee, the Public and Administrative Law Committee, the Civil Litigation Committee, we've got Anti-Money Laundering Committee, we've got 18 standing committees, and when we refreshed our committee membership last year, we had more than 250 people apply to be on those committees, which is just fantastic. And so the council is informed by all of those committees. Each of the committees always has a convener. So one example, we have the Documents and Precedents Committee, and Joanna Pidgeon is the convener of that committee. She's a former president, and so we have a very close line of communication, Joanna and I, and a lot of the other conveners. So she will get 15 people on her committee all giving her some messaging around what we should be doing or what we could be doing, and that then gets filtered directly back to me. So we've got this huge, big, organic group of people who have all got the best interests of the profession at heart.
That's a lot of feedback to get throughout the year.
Yeah, but it's all done really well through the staff. So we've got a fantastic team at the Law Association. And Daniel Conway, our legal services manager, filters a lot of that communication. And so the messages we get are really quite clear and consistent and very helpful.
Based on your experience and what you're seeing and the feedback you're having, is there anything that comes to mind as the most pressing issue facing the legal profession in New Zealand?
Probably not really, because as you say, there are so many. There's nothing that really stands out as being far more important than the others. I mean, the access to justice issue we've talked about is a big one. But if you put a gun to my head and made me answer it, I would have to say well-being in the profession. People outside the profession may look at us and think, these guys have got it sweet, it can't be that difficult. But at the end of the day, we're all under a lot of pressure. We're all under a lot of stress. We tend to take on our clients' problems quite personally, and that can affect you, that can affect your sleep, it can affect your mental health. And so there's a significant piece of work going on at the Law Association to help members, improve members' well-beings. We've got the panel of friends that we are looking at refreshing and giving a little bit more teeth to. We've got the Member Special Fund, which we're looking at increasing and publicising more to help people in times of need. We're looking at perhaps getting a locum panel in place where a sole practitioner, I'll pick Timaru for example, a sole practitioner in Timaru doesn't get to have a holiday because he or she is so busy with his or her practice and client demands and is quite lonely down there, and they might be able to grab a locum from our panel.
Cool.
To help them for a month or let them go away for a month.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so
because obviously the medical profession has that.
Yes.
Is that common in law?
No.
Has it ever been?
There are locums around, but there's been, to my knowledge, there's never been a consistent system for how that might work.
Yeah.
So you might see an ad every now and then in Law News or in the New Zealand Law Society publication for Joe Blogg's locum available, but we're thinking of having a panel, and so there will be one-stop shop. So whether it's an 0800 number or more likely a digital link from our Law News platform where you can inquire about a locum to come and look after your practice or just help you for a month if you've got a particularly busy time.
Wow.
And it could be a real win-win because that practitioner in Timaru, who's having troubles, then gets the help or gets to go away to Europe for a month and recharge his or her batteries. But the locum then gets to go and engage and work for a month in Timaru and then maybe move to Hamilton for the next month.
Yeah, and maybe a really good gig for a young lawyer to experience different environments and really learn the ropes out in the regions.
Yes.
And it's fun too to be able to just travel around. And that's cool.
Yeah, so all these initiatives are designed to try and take the pressure off people because we get consistent messages about how tough it is. And yes, a lot of lawyers are in privileged positions and they're earning good money, and but you have a lot of demands on your time, you have a lot of demands on your day, and so we're really focused on seeing if we can ease that burden and put support structures in place to help people. Yeah,
that's the side of it you don't often hear about, is the pressures that a lot of lawyers are facing. And like you say, the perception is that, it's really well paid and they're doing well financially. But reading Samira Tagavi's story a few weeks ago about what she faces as a criminal lawyer and, the calls she gets 24/7 from very kind of traumatized, stressed out people.
Yes.
and you have to be there. You have to be on call, and you're basically the lives of these people are in your hands.
Yes.
It's not it's not a pleasant position to be in.
No.
I certainly don't envy getting a call at 3 a.m. from someone who's having a breakdown, because they're facing the scenario, and then you having to kind of coax them through it, like you're almost having to be a counsellor or a psychiatrist.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm a commercial lawyer, so it doesn't really happen to me. I don't get too many commercial landlords ringing me at midnight stressing that the tenant hasn't paid the rent. But talking to people like Samira and Julianne Kincaid KC about the calls they get and the clients they need to help, you can't help but feel that it puts them under a lot of pressure and puts them under a lot of stress. And as good as those guys are, it's very difficult for them not to take on the client problems and feel really responsible for outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the reason you get into law in the first place, is to help people and to, I guess, engage in that social justice aspect. So it'd be incredibly hard to switch off and shut your mind off to it.
Ultimately, it's to solve problems. I think most of us lawyers get into the law to solve problems.
Yeah.
And if people say to me, what do you do? I solve people's problems. And Samira will do the same. She solves people's problems. Very different problems, but you do take on that responsibility and you take on that burden, and that must have an effect. It's pressure and it's stress, and so all of the things, or not all of the things, but a lot of the things that the Law Association is doing is to try and help either coach people through how to deal with that, or support them, or do things to alleviate that stress. And completely different example, but coming back to the AML example, the work we're doing there is to try and ease that burden, alleviate that stress, and allow practitioners to get on with what they're really good at doing every day.
If you've got 1 year left,
yes,
and you might take a break and then come back, that's up in the air. But if there's 3 things you hope to achieve in your last year as president, what would they be?
You didn't prepare me for that question, Michael, but I would say, I said it earlier, but the membership numbers for me becomes quite a focus.
Yep, the 9,000 figure.
The 9,000 figure.
Love it.
I shouldn't say that on here, because if we get to 8,500, I'll feel like a failure. But what that tells me is that we're doing really good work, and the fact that we've gone from 3.8 to 7.7 in 8 years, I think, is testament to what we're doing. If we can get to 9,000 members, I will be thrilled. That gives us even more of a voice at the table, so that would be the first thing. The second thing is we've got a new product called M Suites, and we've just launched that. So that's on our new website, www.tlanzmsuites.nz, and that's a whole range of mediation rooms and meeting rooms in the Vero Centre in downtown Auckland. So we're looking at really establishing a fantastic product there for people who need rooms for mediations, arbitrations, or just meeting rooms. So I'd really be keen to develop that as a commercial proposition. And I think the third thing will be, a big focus this year will be our launch of our new legal forms portal. So we've had web forms. I'm a member of the Documents and Precedents Committee, so I get intimately involved in the drafting of things like the deed of lease and the agreement for sale and purchase of real estate. But actually putting that out to our members and real estate agents is the technical part that is a little bit above my head, but we are going to launch a brand new way of doing that this year, and it's really exciting because it's going to be, I've had some feedback from members that the current web forms package is difficult to operate, can be frustrating. Well, all those frustrations are about to disappear because we're going to launch a new way of accessing those forms, which will integrate directly into lawyers' practice management systems and, again, make things so much easier for our members. So the 3 focuses this year will be membership, M Suites, getting that up and running, and getting our new legal forms out to members.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing with us, and it's great to hear about the growth of the association, and the momentum seems to definitely be on your side. So great work, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Michael. I'm really looking forward to the next year. I'm looking forward to the new council coming on board. We've got some exciting things happening, so I might come back and see you in a few months, and we'll analyse how we've gone.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. Subscribe to InFocus, a TLA podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to connect with the Law Association, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, X or Instagram, or visit our website, thelawAssociation.nz. Mā te wā.